That's the easy key. Huh? Anyway, I just thought I would start with that. Um, that's the only thing I don't like about uh, doing the videos on my iPad. It's hard to add. It's hard to add the bumper music. Um, anyway, I did post a little chat here. You know, I was thinking this morning while I was in dialysis, I would love to do more of the jazz festivals, you know, judging and stuff like that, and they call them clinicians. At least that's what they used to in the old days. Um, but I remembered the last time I did something like that, and the coordinator took me out to lunch, and we went together with the other artists, and they were talking about gigs that they had gotten each other. And in fact, I didn't mention this in my text on the thing. Um, in fact, there were some hints. I got you a gig. What can you get me on in Houston? And really, that's not how it works here. I mean, not. I don't mean so. I don't mean here. I mean that doesn't. That's not how it works with me. I'm not connected. I can't get you a job with a jazz festival here. I can't get you clinician work here. I can't get you even a gig at a you know, I do have today, and I didn't have back then. I did have, but it wasn't active. I do have my own band. Actually, I got several bands. Um, but yes, I really think that that's how that works. Is I scratch your back, you scratch my back. And that's why I haven't gotten a bunch of those. That's what I think. Now, of course, you know, if you have somebody like Bobby Shue or Michael Brecker or Randy Brecker or any of those kind of guys in your jazz festival, it's not because he's going to give you a gig. It's going to be because you're going to bring people in, right? So that's not what I mean. I'm talking about because there's guys that are not Randy Brecker. There are guys that are not Michael Brecker, that are not Dizzy Gillespie. Um, they're not famous people that would bring in a crowd, but and yet they're getting these gigs. Why are they getting them? Because uh, it's that whole um, I scratched your back, you scratch my back. David, hello, David. David says music is a hard profession to make money. My trumpet teacher called my mother, and after I told him I wanted to be a professional trumpet player, he called my mother and said no. It's so hard. Yeah, it is. It's a tough life. And you know what? Because of the sickness, yes, actually, this is what I do. The first thing I do with a student that says they want to go pro is I have them look at what their parents make. By the way, I don't ask them what their parents make. I ask them to go home and ask their parents what they make. And then I tell them to divide that amount by 52 and ask yourself if you can get that much money in gigs per week. And if it's not gigs, add students to that. Can you get that much in a week? And most of the students that take lessons with me, I'm talking about the children, they know better. they know they couldn't make the kind of money. Now, if they say after that, it's okay, Mr. Lewis, I want to do this, well, then they know. And they know that's going to be tough. I'm not going to try to just like discourage them. I'm not going to discourage them. But yes, um, you know what I do? One of the things I do when they say they want to go pro, I'll sit back. So the chairs, you can see the chairs in the background. That's where we teach. So the one towards the light is the student, and the other one's me. And I'll lean back and I'll point at the different pieces of furniture, that piece, the chairs that they're actually sitting on, the desk that my computer is on, um, that chair there, this what I use for my printer stand. All of this is furniture. Well, except for the desk. I'll tell you about the desk in a second. All of this is furniture that I got off the street. Paul and I used to run every morning. Now we walk. I'm not going to jolt my kidneys. I think I told you that. I still have hope that my kidneys come back to normal. So I'm not going to run. If they ever tell me, nope, your kidneys are completely gone, then I'll run again. But right now we're just walking because I don't want to damage my kidneys more. And so when we're out in the neighborhood running or walking, we'll see stuff people are throwing out. Now this computer, I mean this printer stand, it's actually got a drawer in it. It had flood damage. Oh, that's another thing. I show them we have rugs. Those rugs were also taken after the flood. People didn't want to wash their rugs after the flood, so we brought them home, washed them out real nice, and now we've got these fancy schmancy rugs on the floor. But yes, this printer stand had flood damage, water damage. We sanded it down, shellacked it. What do they call it? Stained it, and refinished it. And now it's a nice piece of furniture. Very nice. Um, and so it's technically not free because we did have to invest some time and a little bit of money to get it to where it is now. But yes, so these are things that we do to make living as a musician possible. So same thing with fixing cars. And I just make sure that people know if they want to go pro. I remember one time a adult student told me he had a day job, right? He says, I think I want to quit my day job and go pro. I said, how much do you think you can make as a professional trumpet player? He wasn't even all that good. How much do you think you can make? I asked, and in fact, this is one person that I did ask because of the fact that he was an adult. I said, how much do you make? And he said something like 80 grand or something like that. It was in the 90s. How much do you make? 80 grand or something like that. 80, 90. And I said, you'll never make that as a trumpet player. I'll never forget. I won't tell you how much money I make because that's not pertinent. But I'll never forget Dennis Dotson, right? Dennis Dotson is widely regarded as the best jazz trumpet player in Houston. He used to play with the uh, what's his name? Oh, why is that name? The clarinet player that had a big band. Woody Woody. What's his name? Herman. Woody Herman. Dennis Dotson was in the Woody Herman band, and one day Dennis shows up to a gig with a fancy car, and back in the days um, when the online computer was brand new and people weren't doing, and I mean fancy, it wasn't a Chevy or something like that. Not that I don't like Chevys. I'm a Chevy. I'm from a Chevy family, and we get Chevys all the time. My current car is a Chevy, um, but I admit that Chevy is not like a Beamer or a uh, you know what I mean. You guys know what I'm talking about. So anyway, Dennis shows up with a car like this, and we sit in his car and listen to his um, uh, great stereo system in the car, listening to jazz. And he says, "What a blast it is to be making money for the first time in his life." What was he, like 60 at the time? For the first time in his whole career, long after he left Woody Herman, he's finally making. How much did he say? I'm finally making more than $30,000. That's what he said. I'm finally making more than $30,000. And my impression was, before it was always beneath $30,000, and then for the first time he could afford a nice car. So yes, that's a great story to show. Just even if you're the best of the best, there's no money in this. That's why, by the way, and I'll catch up with you guys' comments real quick. Um, that's why when I do have a student that wants to be a professional player, I tell them it's probably better to major in business and minor in music. It's probably better to major in business, minor in music, or don't even take music classes at all and use that money rather to take private lessons. Then, when you get out of school, treat your music business like a business. That's my advice always. Anyway, let me catch up on some comments. Kevin says, I love taking something that was perceived as worthless and turning it into something that is useful. Um, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the um, the music business? Is that what you're talking about? Herman, the Thundering Herd. Oh, yes, you're talking about the table. Yes. Okay, and I didn't tell you about my desk. I got this desk. It's an old library desk. Very, very nice. I love this desk. I've resurfaced it twice so far. Um, I got it at a resale shop for $60. So at least the desk I did pay for, but I paid a lot less than what you would pay for a modern pressed wood desk. All right, let's see here. This is David. It is only a few that make big money. It is like football. Only a few make it to pro. Even if they are talented, Herb Alpert is the richest trumpet player that ever lived. That's definitely true. He created a sound and parlayed that into one of the biggest recording companies. That's correct. And Herb Albert is one of the reasons why I teach the students what I teach them about making a career in music is because of what he did. And that's business stuff. That's not, the music thing. Yes, I understand he did a great thing musically. But his success, you can't ignore the business side of what he's doing. My early mentor, this is David again. My early mentor, Charles Brady, was principal trumpet player in the National Symphony, or in the National Symphony. He gave it up and came back home to teach school. Hey, that's great. Yes, I'm sure there's a lot of orchestras, including the National Symphony, that probably don't pay as well as some school jobs. I'm sure. And from what I hear, and I don't I don't believe it needs to be this way, but the orchestra jobs can be extremely stressful. And I have a theory about that. I really do. I think if you were insincere, if you were fake in your audition and you have to maintain that fakeness, I think it can be a very stressful gig. Instead of doing it now, I have a video coming out that this is going to sound like it contradicts, but I'm not really contradicting myself. We can dig into deeper detail later. But yes, I do believe that if you played staccato when you hate staccato, if you played with a tone you don't like, if you don't like what's coming out of the bell, orchestra job or any job that you audition for that you pushed buttons to get into. And when I say push buttons, doing stuff you don't actually like to do, that's going to be a tough gig. That's and even disregarding all of the nastiness that happens in those organizations, even just disregarding that, it's a tough gig if you're faking it. You know? Hello, Nathan. Nice to see you again. Nathan says, I am a 63-year-old first-time trumpet player. I have a teacher, but I struggle to read music. Do you have any suggestions? My main suggestion is to practice easy music and do not take your eyes off the music. People tell you to read ahead, and if you're a beginner, do not try to do that. In fact, I just had a video where I said, don't try to look ahead, okay? The looking ahead happens naturally. You don't have to try. And in fact, if you do try, I'm not going to go into this again, but if you do try, I believe it makes things worse, not better, okay? What I want you to do is play really easy music. Maybe even put fermatas over each of the notes and just stare at the note while you play the note. Just stare at it. And then if it's a rhythm, play that rhythm, play that measure slowly over and over again, staring at those notes. A lot of times we don't spend enough time. I've caught so many students who say, oh, I have difficulty sight reading. They're not even looking at the music. How are you going to learn to sight read if you're not looking at the music while you play? And it's funny because I've had people say, and don't get me wrong, I'm not putting down ADHA or whatever it's called. I forget the initials, right? I'm not poo-pooing that, but I've had people tell me they can't sight read because they've got this thing where they can't concentrate long enough. But if I make them sit there and play one note staring at the note, now the ADHA has gone away. I don't mean instantly. I'm not saying instantly, but we go through these. And you guys, some of you are already my students and might have heard me talk about this before. Whenever we have adversity, and in this sense, what I mean by adversity is something fighting against us. It can be health issues. It can be um, like uh, mentally disturbing news, right? I don't mean, that we're mental. I mean, someone like divorce, like a death in the family. Now, I do believe in both divorce and death in the family. Take some time off, but that doesn't go away overnight. And when you come back, there's this heaviness in your heart. I like to push through all of these. The most recent one, well, actually, the most recent one is a student who's taking acne medicine, and his lips are all dried out, and he's struggling to play. I believe in pushing through that. I believe in pushing through that. Um, uh, what is it called when you get the pimples? Cold sores. Push through it. Unless it's in a place where you're going to cause damage, don't cause damage. Okay? Don't cause damage. But if there's no damage, push through it. Push through the discomfort. Push through the ADHD. I hope I'm saying that right. ADHD, is that right? Yes, that's right. Okay, push through it. Do I've made a whole career out of pushing through. We've talked about that before, and in fact, I think I have a almost recent video about it. How I had some broken teeth or something like that. Oh, there's the broken teeth, and then there's also the time that I put myself in the lip. I had to push through or not make money. So this is what I mean when I say I've had a whole career of pushing through. I pushed through after my parents died, pushed through after the divorce, pushed through when the teeth are broken, pushed through all of these things. David says, my client was Buck Owens. He was very talented, but his entire career was based on following the money. He started to sing because the singer made more than the guitarist. He started writing so as not, right, to pay royalties. Then publishing, etc. He was a phenomenal businessman. That's another great example. That's another great example. Thanks for sharing that, David. That's another great example. So I guess the theme today is the music business stuff. Kevin says Buck Owens did make excellent music regardless. He was a very, very good guitarist that is underrated as well, like Roy Clark. Yeah. Yep. So yes, I'm big on the whole business thing. Um, let me tell you guys my background with the business stuff. Because when I was in school, I thought like a student. And in fact, I had people tell me that for as long as you're a great player, you're going to work. And I just thought that's how it worked. You get to be a great player. You work and work and work to be the best player that you can be. And then people are just going to knock on your door and um, hire you because you're the best. Um, that's not true. And I didn't start getting into the business side of it till I moved to Houston. And I had to put money on the table. Not that I didn't before, but I think this is the first time when we moved to Houston. I think this is the first time that I had this to like 100% put money on food on the table with a music income. And I took the business side of it very, very seriously. Now, let me tell you what doesn't work for me. I just know this because of just the personality type, right? I can't do that networking stuff. I do something that's sort of similar, and I shouldn't make it sound like it's something I do now. But for 25 years, I had a thing that I did that replaced networking. There was other stuff I did, um, but it was all business based. Now, I always took my musicianship seriously, but not at the expense of the music. And I don't believe that the music should come first anymore. I do believe that because and this is not just me. I have a Clifford Brown biography book, and Clifford Brown is quoted in there saying there's a lot of great trumpet players out there, but what happens to them is largely financial. And if you think about it, if you've got a gig, you can afford to practice. If you don't have a gig and you have to get a day job, then it is very, very difficult to keep your horn up to that professional level. Very difficult. Now, I know guys that do it, don't get me wrong. I know guys that have like band director jobs or even just regular uh, daytime gigs, and they seem to pull it off. But it's not easy. It's not easy. Kevin says, Mr. Lewis, did you ever do a cruise ship gig for a few weeks or months? I'm not good enough, but the idea always intrigued me and sounded fun. Well, let's first say that it's not fun. From what I hear, um, they have two areas of the ship: the workers and the guests. And the worker side of it, I don't think is very pleasant. It might be fun on stage, but even that is doubtful in my opinion. Okay, I know guys that did it for a long, long time. I auditioned for one of them. I think it was Princess Cruises or whatever they call it. I auditioned and I got, believe it or not, I got 100% on their audition. They have it. It's basically a sight reading audition, and I basically had a perfect audition, which I'm going to tell you is extremely rare for me. I've had from what I understand, I've had two 100% auditions. The first one was for the Army when I was going through the recruiting process, which obviously I didn't get into the Army, but yes, during that time, I was sent to the band on Fort Bliss, the band director there, whoever the leader was. I know they do it according to rank. And I auditioned, and he says, "You got 100%." Now, I don't know. I don't trust Army recruiters because of the experience I had. I don't trust them. I think they're probably mostly scoundrels. They're worse than car salesmen, as far as their reputation goes. Um, but the other audition I got 100% on was for the cruise ships. And I told them that I would love to take a cruise gig, but I can't be called half of a week before the cruise starts. And every call I got was like on a Monday, ready to go on Friday, or a Sunday, ready to go on Tuesday. No, no, absolutely not. I cannot believe the lack of professionalism in the cruise ships. Now, I don't know. Once you get, once you take a gig and you get there, maybe it's not so bad. I've had students that did it. I've had friends that did it, and it's not like it's a terrible gig. I don't think it's a terrible gig, but from what I can tell, it's not fun. It's just a gig, and there are people that refine their chops on that gig because you do play a lot. So there's a guy on my Facebook, one of my Facebook friends from Austin, who is every once in a while going out back on the cruise ships again. And he seems to like it because he keeps going back. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got a clogged nose. All right, any questions? We don't have to talk about business if you don't want. Some people think business is a bad word. And the truth is, I even saw, what did I see? I only go on to X to post this, to post the link for this Q and A. That's the only reason I go on there. And while I was on there, I saw something from a guy that says, this is the reason Christians can't be capitalists. And it said uh, something about, it's that verse that says God will avenge people that have stolen wages, right? And I'm like, stolen wages? What makes you think that everything capitalist is stolen? That's awful. That's ridiculous. But yes, there is a perception that if you're talking about business, especially amongst musicians, oh, you're only in it for the money. No, do you know what? Without the money, there's no progress. If you can't put food on the table, if you can't feed yourself, if you can't get out of if you can't not be homeless, you tell me how effective any practicing you do is going to be. And I'll remind you what Clifford Brown said. There's a lot of great trumpet players out there, but what happens to them is largely financial. Now, I don't necessarily approve of that kind of language. Financial doesn't happen to you. Financial is not what happens to you. So I don't agree with his wording. But I can tell you, I've lived through this. I lived through the good times and the bad. And I can tell you, I make better music when I have food. Okay, I make better music when I have a place to live. I make better music when I have a car to get to the gig and fuel to get me there. This idea that it can't be all about the music is it's just an offensive insult. Hello, Trad. Trad asks, how should I practice vibrato? Let me tell you the first thing about that. I tell all my students that when you start practicing vibrato, it should be overly exaggerated. It should be overly exaggerated. It should be so overly exaggerated for so long that after a while, and how long does it take? 6 months, maybe a year. But it should be so overly exaggerated that you can't stop. And at some point, I have to tell you, chill out on the vibrato. So if we're playing like a classical piece, I would never play such a wide vibrato like I just did now. I would never do that. But as a student, let's compare it to when you're first learning how to write as a kindergartner, and they give you that big fat pencil, and you write like this, right? This is the same thing as that. These exaggerated motions, and you want to do it for so long that you end up having to be told, hey, back off on the vibrato, man. That's what we want. We want to exaggerate it for so long that it becomes so heavy and so automatic that now we have to pull you back. So that's the first thing I'm going to tell you. Let me also say that there's a difference between jazz vibrato and classical vibrato. Classical vibrato is always metered. If it's not metered, you run the risk of making your classical piece sound like a jazz piece. It has to be metered. What do I mean by metered? The wah 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 has to be the same speed. Wah 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 wah. No matter whether it's fast or slow, has to be consistent. Wah 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 wah. So like all the way through the whole song, all through the full note. Okay, we want it to be metered. Jazz, on the other hand, should not be metered, and vice versa, right? I said that if you play non-metered vibrato on a classical piece, it's going to sound like jazz. The same is true the other way around. If you play a metered vibrato on Misty, that's not cool. That was cool in the Guy Lombardo days, but it's not cool today. Okay? Here's how I would play vibrato on Misty. You see how it starts slow and speeds up. Now, it doesn't have to always start slow. You can do other stuff. Sorry about this. I thought the light would fix this. There we go. I'll have to back up a little. So yes, so it's important to know the difference between the classical stuff and the jazz stuff. It's important to know that. Now, I used to tell people that my classical vibrato, I use the jaw vibrato, and jazz vibrato, I use a hand vibrato, and that used to be true for my whole career until the last couple of years. Maybe getting sick had something to do with it. I don't know. But something changed in the last couple of years, and I almost don't do any hand vibrato anymore at all. The only reason I did the hand vibrato earlier was to show you, so you could see it. Okay. All right, that was a good question. The biggest thing on the vibrato is to do a lot of it. By the way, when you get to where you're doing vibrato, don't backslide. There's some Christian language for you. Don't backslide. Once you start the vibrato, don't practice a piece and say, oh, I'll get the notes and rhythms now and I'll add things like vibrato later. Don't do that. Please, 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 please don't do that. Okay? Don't do that. Once you start doing vibrato, do it always. No matter how bad it is, no matter how much it makes you screw up, this is one of those things that should be like a minnow trap. You can get in, you can't get back out again. There's no going back. Because if you go back, if you give yourself that back door, you'll use that back door. And see, here's the thing. This is one of the first adult arguments that I ever had with another student. In other words, we were in college, and I had a brass quintet, and the bass trombone player, I think I was a bit of a tyrant in the group. It was my group, but those guys are volunteers, and I think I was trying too hard to be like my teacher. And I'm not saying that my teacher was a tyrant. Don't get me wrong. He was an excellent teacher, but he knew what he wanted, and he demanded that. And I thought, okay, here I am, sort of like in his role, because he had a brass quintet too. And I saw them, how they did stuff and the rehearsals and stuff like that. So I was trying to be like him. I don't think I realized until decades later how obnoxious that was coming from a fellow student. Okay. So yes, that one of my very first arguments with a fellow student was about this. I was running the quintet rehearsal, and I noticed that nobody was phrasing, nobody was using vibrato. Everything was just bah, 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 bah. You guys have heard me talk about that kind of playing. Bah, 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 bah. It's like machine gun playing. By the way, most high schools today, it's a very sad thing. At least here in Houston, most high schools that I've ever heard play without style. And you could say, well, that's a style, isn't it? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's a style. An absence of style is that you could maybe say that if it was one section of one piece, but no. Playing without style is not your interpretation. That's not how that works. Anyway, so we were in this brass quintet rehearsal, and I said, come on, guys, put some effort into the musicianship. And the bass trombone player got pissed off at me, and he says, dude, we're just sight reading. And that spelled a chasm between me and them. The music should be constant. The music is every note you play. Sight reading or not sight reading. First time ever learning the piece or not learning the piece. It should be so automatic that it's on all the time. So when we're talking about vibrato, and you're diving into, by the way, vibrato is the first thing that makes you sound like a pro. Without the vibrato, you don't sound like a pro. So in my studio, the first thing we do to take you from that beginner level to start moving your way towards professional musicianship is to learn how to play vibrato. So yes, it's a big deal. Once you pass that line and you're starting to use vibrato, use it everywhere that it's appropriate. Don't quote unquote backslide on it. Okay? David says, my first teacher said, always practice straight. Use vibrato only when desired in the music. So that's what I meant by appropriate. It's not always appropriate. And you're right about practicing. Like if you're practicing exercises, that should be straight. There's no vibrato in exercises. When you're doing the daily routine, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it is actually wrong to practice the daily routine with vibrato. Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up. But when it's appropriate, you should use vibrato every time that it's appropriate. Nathan says, do you recommend carrying a trumpet mouthpiece to buzz when you can throughout the day to strengthen your chops? No, I don't recommend that. I don't believe strength is an issue for most people. I believe that control is usually the problem, not strength. Now, can you gain control by buzzing the mouthpiece? I don't know how I feel about that. Obviously, mouthpiece buzz is in my routines, so I'm not anti-mouthpiece buzz, but what I am anti is spending a lot of time. I used to, by the way, don't get me wrong. When I was younger, I used to think that I had to make the best use of every minute of my day. So I would carry a mouthpiece just like what you're talking about. I would carry a mouthpiece, and if I'm driving, if I'm out walking, if I'm doing chores around the house, I would have the mouthpiece on there. And what my understanding is of the trumpet today and how it works, I believe that's all wasted time. It's not really helping your chops. It might help some control, but the fact that the horn's not on there changes things. So I don't think, and so I already answered the first half of the question. For chops, no, not to get strength. In my system, we don't do lip buzz for strength. We don't do mouthpiece buzz for strength. No. We do. Now, can you get strength that way? Yes. That's not why we do this stuff. It's very important to keep the objective clearly in mind. What are you trying to do? And when you're doing the lip buzz and the mouthpiece buzz, it should not be for strength. And the reason I say that is because the strength that you get for doing that will be not 100% applicable to the trumpet. Okay? That strength is not the same strength that you get from playing the trumpet. So how do we build strength on the trumpet? You build strength by playing the trumpet. So that's how I feel about that. There's no better way to build strength than on your horn. I know that there's people that they don't have as much time to practice and they feel like they have to build their chops that way. I don't think it really works. And you could say, well, that's I had a student that would always come back with, well, it's different for you. And you could say, right, you could say, well, you did the mouthpiece stuff when you were younger. Didn't that give you the strength that you wanted? So basically, what you could be saying right now is that I'm perceiving it incorrectly. That actually the mouthpiece stuff did benefit me, and now I'm just like don't know what I'm talking about, right? Excuse me. So I don't think that's how it works, and especially because I still work with students, and I see how successful they are, and I just think it's better to spend that time on the horn. If you're looking for endurance, spend that time on the horn. Chad asks me, how many students do you have? That's not a straightforward answer because we have two kinds of students. We've got weekly students, but we also have a whole bunch of what we call ad hoc students. Now, what is an ad hoc student? An ad hoc student is someone who can take one lesson and maybe another lesson 5 years later. Do I say that that person is not my student? I also have students that will take one a month. I have students that will do twice a year. I have students that do once a year. I remember I used to have a student who was teaching at a school, not music. I think she was in the theater department or English and and whenever she had to play the trumpet at her school, she would take a few lessons to learn the songs she had to play. That was my job, teach her how to play that song. And so anyway, it's hard to say. If we're gonna say all of those are my students, then I have hundreds of students. Maybe not hundreds, but you get the point, right? I'm exaggerating. Um, because they're all welcome to come back, and and you know what? We don't. My students' situation is a very different situation because they can take lessons, and this happens, right? David was doing this for a while. I don't mind. I hope David doesn't mind me saying this. David was taking less often than he did as he does now, and he was supplementing the lessons with the books and the videos and this Q&A. And for that whole time, I considered David my student the whole time. So I could have a student that takes one single lesson, but he's using the books. He's using the um the uh the videos. He's coming and participating in the Q&A. We had a student, one of my students came last week and popped into the Q&A, and I don't think I've seen him in over a year. I still consider him my student. So that's not a question that I can answer straight ahead with a straight answer. Um, I'm, you guys know that I'm a religious. Not, I guess religious is the wrong word. I'm a Christian, and the Holy Spirit told me, and yes, I'm that kind of Christian. The Holy Spirit told me that it's time for me to shift gears. This was a few years back. It's time for me to shift gears and consider all of you my students. Even if you don't buy the books, even if you don't buy the sheet music, even if the only thing you're doing is watching a few videos, my attitude towards you is you're one of my students. I told you guys last week about that student that recently quit. And he was remarking about how present I was, and I if I understand him right, that what he meant was that I give all my attention to you in the lesson, and I'm not going to. If you take just one lesson, I'm not going to blow you off, right? If you just take two lessons, I'm not going to blow you off. I'm going to give you my full attention. So yes, I can't tell you how many students I have. It does. My studio does not work like that. I'm gonna look something up real quick. I'm sure this is just a scam. Yeah, I knew it. I don't look anything like Felix. That's somebody just trolling. Might even be a robot. I don't know. Any other questions before we sign off? Paper versus iPad. There's pros and cons for both. Hello, Foot, by the way. Nice to see you, Mr. Foot. There's pros and cons for both. I think overall I still prefer paper, but I use, maybe for gigs, I prefer the iPad. Maybe. I haven't done enough gigs with iPad. I mean, I have, it's just, let me put it this way. when I did have an iPad, see, I got my most recent iPad right before I got sick. And then so I cut way back on the gigs, and the gigs I have had, there's no opportunity to use iPad, so it's all been paper. I think the only gigs that I've had my new iPad for are my own band's jazz gigs. And it's just nice to have. I've got how many fake books on my iPad? I've got what? I think 20 fake books. And it's just nice to have that so that if people request music, and I don't have to carry all that stuff. So yeah, that's nice. I also use the iPad at church. I play at church almost every Sunday, and I if it's a hymn that I don't have in my iPad yet, I will scan it, and put it in the iPad before church starts, and then I will write my second parts in so that, and every time we play the hymn again, because we do cycle through. I've been using the iPad now for a year and a half, so there's plenty of repeats. Excuse me, sorry. And I will even, thank you. I will even update. So during the first part of the message, I'll go and edit my second part. Thank you, guys. I'll go in and edit my second part, so next time it's even better. And that's one thing that's nice, because you don't have to carry all of that stuff. Now, also, I used recently in some of the lessons, I couldn't find two of my duet books. And I wanted one of my students to go back to the beginning duets. So for a reason, this is not a penalty. It's more like therapy. It's a musically therapeutic exercise to go back to easier music. And we've talked about that in the sight reading video. And yes, I couldn't find those two duet books that I wrote. So I pulled them up. Everything that I've written is on my iPad because my iPad is connected to Dropbox, and Dropbox is where I keep all my books. Even the background files, all the, I call them raw files, raw finale files, raw word files, raw image files, and all that stuff. So I wanted to do these duets with these students. It's actually two different students. And I couldn't find the physical books. So I pulled it out on the iPad, and that's kind of nice. It's actually kind of nice. But when I'm practicing, I try to do all of it. I'm bleeding again. Sorry, I hope you guys can't see that. Huh, I wonder what YouTube would do if they could see this blood gushing out of my hand, my arm. Let me see here. Electric screens are a wonderful thing for my old guy vision, especially in low light. Yeah, I know. Mr. Foot says, the duets you wrote with 4 other local trumpet players? So, yeah, no, that's not. I write my duets mostly for my students. A lot of people don't know that, right? They don't know that the reason I wrote the duets is for them. I told the one student, he's a mariachi player. I'm actually quite proud of him right now because he's making such progress. I'm proud of all you guys, but sometimes some of you will surge out ahead of not ahead of the other players. I mean surge out ahead of where they were, and so this guy is making great progress right now, and but I have him. We're working primarily out of my trumpet player duet book, and I told him that um. So how do you know Ted Zimmerman? When I look back at all my students, and if I had to pick some favorites, I would have to say I've got two top favorites. And I know I shouldn't be saying that because a bunch of you are also students. Do you know John too? Are you a HSPVA student? Oh, you're the one who told me you knew John before? Okay, good friends. Okay. So, yes, when I first started writing the first duet book, it was with M4. Not actually with, but unless you consider the guinea pigs to be with. But yes, Ted and John both got dedications in my original duet book. Not the book itself. I used to have this online book that I called The Stack of Trumpet Duets. It was it was just a PDF. But yes, Ted and John. So you don't know Ted from his Miami days. You know him from Houston, right? I always try to keep. Anyway, I was saying I have two. Now that we put John up here, okay, I should I shouldn't be saying who my favorites are. Oh my. Let me not say who my favorites are. Brandon was never my student. Brandon, uh, you know, Brandon was only my student in the summer jazz workshop. So I don't mind saying that he was in some of my classes at the summer jazz workshop. And then when at HSPVA, when I was teaching jazz improv, we would have one day a week where we had a listening class. And my job on that day was to bring my own albums in so that the class could listen. And let me tell you this, the guys that were in my improv class, I don't mind saying this in a very general way. The guys that were in my improv class have become, for their generation, some of the best jazz players in the world. I don't take credit for that. I don't believe that's how it works. Teachers should not take credit. If they want to give any credit, that's up to them. I don't have a problem if they don't. Right? I'm not saying I don't take credit from students. I'm just saying I don't take credit from students. That's why you don't hear me say this very often, right? But the students who were in that improv class, now, and I'm not talking about the listening class, because during the listening class, see, I was the advanced improv teacher, and Bob Morgan was the beginner improv teacher. And one day a week, we would join classes, and I would have a listening day. And Brandon was in that listening day. He was um, he was at he was in the jazz class as a beginner when I was teaching the advanced. So that's my only. And I also did work with the combo at the school, But yes, um, of course, Brandon was and is a phenomenal player back then. But he was just a little bit uh, too late getting to PVA to be in my class. He was still there after I left. In fact, I think he got into the advanced. Yes, yes, that's Foot is listing some of the players that were in. Don't forget Eric. Eric Harland was in my class. In fact, Eric and Kendrick were in my class for 2 or 3 years because we needed a drummer. So, I have I'm not going to tell you who it was. There's also a bunch of other players besides these. These are just the top, right? These are just the top players. There's other very successful players from those years. I was there. My first year was Jason Moran's last year, I think, and I didn't have him in my advanced class, but I did work with the combo, and I did work with all of them. By the way, Robert Glasper had me help him, and so did Walter Smith, if I remember right. I played trumpet on both of their recitals, their senior recitals. How many people get to say that? How many people were on Robert Glasper's senior recital? So yes, I played a bunch of senior recitals when I was there. So Kevin asks, have I ever considered doing an all-day, like off and on for 5 or 6 hours, in-person, multi-person workshop? So I have done back in the 90s. I had a summer trumpet workshop, I think it was called, or summer trumpet camp. And then we tried doing that again for 2 years. About 15 or 20 years later. And I think we could probably pull it off now, mostly because of YouTube. But that second year didn't go so well. So yes. So think about that. I don't typically toot my own horn, but the fact that some of these guys who are now the best jazz players for their generation, the fact that they asked me to be in their senior recital at their high school recital. I'm not just somebody that teaches the theory. The reason I got that job is because I could play. In fact, that's what my interview was. I'll never forget that interview. I'll never forget the interview. Bob Morgan brings me into the office, asks me 1 or 2 questions, and then we go into the band room across the hall, the jazz room, and he sits down to the piano, and we jam for about 30 minutes. That was my audition. I mean, not audition, that was my interview for that gig. And yeah, so he wanted somebody on that position that could play. And so here you have the guy that taught. Now he had world class musicians come out of the school the whole time he was there. We sometimes forget about the older ones. I forget their names, but he had great students from the time he started until the very end. And I mean world class people that got out of school. Stefan Schultz is one of them. Um, you can look online. Um, Let me look at this real quick. Oh, I don't like when they take you to a page that you have to pay for. So let me read some of these off to you. Shelley Carroll. We don't think of Shelley Carroll as a and who's Shelley Carroll? Duke Ellington Band, among other things. Everett Harp, Herman Matthews, Chris Walker. These are all students of Bob Morgan. And there's more than that. These are just the ones. I'm looking at the award plaque. There's so many more than just these. These are the ones that got recognized at DocFest. So yes, it was such, Mackenzie Smith is another one. Mackenzie Smith was one of the ones that I worked with in the combo. I don't think he was in my class. I don't believe. You know who else people don't think about is Delandria Mills. Delandria Mills is the flute and Dustin Drews. That's right. Delandria Mills is the flute instructor at Peabody, or at least she was the last time I heard from her. She plays jazz flute. She plays classical. Yeah, so there's so many people, and Delandria was in my she was in my class. She was one of the ones in my very first class. So anyway, I better sign off. I'd say I don't brag about the students, but yeah, this is like going down memory lane. Wonderful. I love. Let me just tell you this. That gig paid terrible. there's a bunch of gigs that I've had in my career that I just took because I knew that I was getting more out of it than just the money. And that was one of them. I would make, for all that work I put into it, I would often make just $65 for the whole week. It was terrible pay. Terrible, terrible pay. And but I wouldn't give that up for $1 million. Really. I used to say all the time at PVA that I learned more at PVA than the students did. Well, I was there longer. Yes, Dalton Lee too. Anyway, I better sign off. We want someone got me talking about my PVA days, and here we go, Mr. Foot. But thank you for bringing all this stuff up. It was a pleasure talking, going back down memory lane. Mr. Foot says, you leave the world with no money or objects, just the good memories and lives you inspire. There you go. Now, let me tell you this. Let me be clear about this. I don't know how much any of these guys even remember me. Um, and like I said, that's not what it's about. I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need recognition. I don't need and the chances are I was just another student with them, just getting paid to be there, you know? So I I yeah. And I'm that way with all of the students. I don't say that it was me that got you there. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. I don't say that's when I get excited about all these students that you're naming. I normally don't name them, by the way, because it makes me sound like I'm bragging, and I really don't want that. Okay? These guys actually are. I'm not exaggerating. They're the best jazz musicians in the world right now for their age group. And but like I said, that's not when I'm excited about talking about them. It's because I was part of it. It was just so exciting to just be part of that. I do hope that some of them learned some stuff from me. I do hope that. Otherwise, what was I doing there? Um, but no, that's not. That's not. It's not about. It's not about that for me. Um, I was just very privileged to be in that environment. Okay. All right. So I better get going. Thank you guys. Thanks for hanging out. We will see you next time. Have a great weekend. God bless you. And see you later.